What's up, gamers? I'm Josh and this is Copper Dragon Games. Today, in true October, getting ready for Halloween fashion, we are looking at some cursed magic items for Dungeons and Dragons. Specifically, I want to share with you my philosophy on what makes certain types of cursed items better for your gaming experience than others. We'll be looking at 6 individual items, 2 directly from the Dungeon Master's Guide, 2 that are tweaks to standard magic items from the Dungeon Master's Guide, and 2 that are a little more complicated but still bring that cursed feel to your campaign. Regardless of how you introduce cursed items, they do have some negative effects, and it can be easy for players to really get annoyed with them. My suggestion to make your campaign better is to only include those items that give players a meaningful choice. The gotcha items that surprise, your character stinks until you figure out how to get rid of this types of items are just not good for gameplay. They're not fun, they ruin the enjoyment for certain players, and they don't bring a lot of positives. On the other hand, if the curse itself is not dangerous in some way, then what's the point of even having the curse? There's a sweet spot in between with items that are both incredibly useful but also potentially dangerous. And those are the items that I believe are the best for campaigns. When players use these items, they have to make a meaningful decision. Is this item's potential risk worth the benefits that it brings for my character and for our party? Let's look at those 6 examples and see why players will love interacting with these items despite their curses. So let's take a look at some of these cursed items from the Dungeon Master's Guide and see why they work and why they fit that philosophy. First of all, we'll go with the Berserker Battle Axe. The Berserker Battle Axe is a really cool weapon. It's almost like getting a +2 strength and a +2 con just by having it equipped. And what barbarian or fighter doesn't want an extra bonus to attack and damage rolls? Especially with a magic weapon that's going to bypass those resistances that they're looking to bypass anyway. Not to mention this effective 2-point constitution increase to bump your hit point maximum up for every level that you've attained. That is huge. So this clearly fits the definition of an item that is actually useful despite its curse. Now, the curse does have drawbacks, and they are potentially dangerous. For one, most of your attacks with any other weapons are going to have disadvantage. But you're the character with the Berserker Battle Axe. Why would you be attacking with any other kind of weapons? This weapon is awesome. The second drawback is a little more intense. The potential to lose some of your control over your character. That's a pretty big deal too. You do have to fail a DC 15 Wisdom save in order for that to happen, but you have to make that save every time you get hit. And I don't care how high your wisdom score is, how high your wisdom save is. If you get hit enough times in combat, eventually you're going to fail this check. Once you fail it, this is where the actual danger kicks in. Because even though more than likely you are going to be attacking the closest creature to you anyway, there's a potential that the closest creature near you is actually one of your allies. And that causes real problems in the middle of a combat. That being said, this weapon is still awesome. Players still tend to like this. It's still cool. Aside from the possibility of you having a Hulk smash moment in which you attempt to destroy everyone around you, this weapon is really cool. The upsides are helpful. They're really useful in combat. You're performing a role that you would be performing anyway, being a martial melee class, and the flavor fits really well. So it definitely fits our criteria of an item that is cursed, technically, but that still brings enough of an advantage to be useful to a player. The second item we're going to look at is the Shield of Missile Attraction. At first glance, best case scenario, this is still a functional shield. It still improves your armor class. Not only that, it gives you resistance to ranged weapon attacks. So all the ranged attacks that do hit you, you're going to take less damage from. That's helpful. It definitely meets the first criteria of the item needing to be actually useful. The curse takes that benefit and puts a twist on it. So, yes, you are more likely to take less damage, less likely to take more damage. You're not going to take as much damage from ranged weapon attacks when they hit you. However, when you're wearing this, you're going to be hit with more ranged weapon attacks. So, in practice, this may actually just even out. However, the cool thing about the Shield of Missile Attraction is that it can change your strategy in combat significantly, and depending on how you see your character's role in the party, it may actually benefit the party as a whole. If you're a tanky character who likes to draw the attention of opponents, you want them to attack you rather than your allies, this is perfect. It's perfect for a barbarian, for example, with tons and tons of hit points that is wading into combat and is expecting to take extra hits. This can also be perfect for a somewhat beefier backline character, like a cleric, for example, who focuses on ranged attacks or control spells. You may not be a dedicated frontliner with tons of hit points and other resistances, but you're definitely beefier than the wizard standing 10 feet away who can't take the extra hits and would benefit greatly from that cleric eating up all the ranged weapon attacks that were directed in that general area. The Shield of Missile Attraction is a perfect example of one of those items that is, yes, technically cursed, but the benefits are so great, or at least the potential benefits are so great, that weathering the curse may actually be worth it. Just don't forget to tell your archer in the back of the party not to target anyone nearby. Next, we take a look at a couple of standard DM's Guide magic items that I've put a slight twist on to make them a little more interesting than what players are expecting to happen when they find them. We'll kick this off with the periapt of wound closure. Now, this item is almost all upside. You stabilize whenever you're dying at the start of your turn. You don't have to worry about death saves whenever you go down in combat. When you roll hit dice to regain hit points, you double the number of hit points they restore. It's a cool item. I decided to put a little twist on this item in a campaign that I'm currently running and added a curse. You can't willfully break your attunement from the item, and you can't die from natural causes or old age. My players actually stumbled upon this item as it was being worn by an NPC that they met deep in a dungeon who had been locked away for many, many, many years with no way to find food or sustenance of any kind. He'd been stuck in this dungeon for, I described him as being old, emaciated, starving, pitiful almost, and begging for a release from this curse. And my players released him from it without taking any violent action against him, which is more than what I can say for some of the previous groups I've DM'd for. I was proud of them. But in any case, the point is, they gained this item that is, on the surface, all upside. And mechanically, there's really very little downside to this item. The only time that its curse would mechanically come up very often in play is if they have a fourth attunement item that they want to attune, and yet they've already attuned to this one, then they may have a problem because they can't unattune without spending some resources, cast and remove curse, that kind of stuff. In any case, it's not about the mechanics in this point. It's about the flavor and the story. This periapt of wound closure makes it really hard for your character to die. That seems like a really good thing, but knowing that the item is cursed and that you can't die, but you can't die, and you may be left in a really negative position, starving, miserable. It's amazing how much this little twist caused my players to consider whether or not they even wanted to attune to this thing. Is it a useful item? Absolutely. Is it dangerous? Technically, in combat, not at all. But long term for your character, yes. Players who are invested in their characters may not want their characters attuned to an item that has great mechanical benefit in the short term, but has long term, potentially very negative, fate worse than death type of consequences for their characters. Is it useful? Yes. Is it dangerous? Kind of. It fits our definition, but the important thing is it still gives players that true decision-making point of, are the risks greater than the rewards? Next, we'll look at my red bag of tricks. And you've probably seen the other colored bags of tricks. Rust, tan, and gray, I believe. This one is identical to a gray bag of tricks in all ways except one. You can reach inside, you pull out a little fur ball, throw it up to 20 feet away, and it grows into a creature which will fight alongside you and be your little fuzzy friend for the rest of the combat, maybe even longer than that. This item, however, is cursed. When you remove that little fur ball and toss it up to 20 feet away, it reacts initially just like any of the other bags of tricks would. One of my players was so excited about getting one of these that they immediately grabbed one of the balls, threw it out into the hallway of a dungeon, and waited to see what grew out of the little fur ball. And as I described this fur ball growing in size and taking on the form of a wolf, and then growing into an even greater size, the form of a dire wolf, they knew something was wrong when I added that the eyes of this wolf were glowing and the mouth was foaming, and instead of looking at them as an ally, it turned to the nearest PC and growled and looked as if it were about to pounce. This version of the bag of tricks calls forth creatures just like the others, but instead of allies, these are feral beasts that attack anything they see, the closest creature. Can it be useful? Sure. Toss it into a horde of enemies where you're not the closest creature and watch it attack all your foes. Throw it in such a way that it can reach your enemies but can't reach you. Perhaps you've levitated up above the battlefield and dropped it onto your opponents. There are lots of ways to make use of this item, but is it dangerous? Potentially, yes. If your plan fails and it gets close to you and you're the nearest creature, your fuzzy little friend is going to attack you instead of the bad guys. So this item, like the others, also meets my criteria of having positive and potentially dangerous effects that force players to make a tactical decision. Again, are the risks greater than the rewards? The next two are a little more complicated. Let's look at the Amulet of the Abyss. Now, I didn't create this item entirely on my own. I was very heavily inspired by an item of the same name, which I found in the Encyclopedia Magica. I think it was originally printed in a Dragon magazine from way back. In any case, using this action lets you summon some Dretch. They appear, they are completely loyal to you, they follow your orders, they attack your foes. You can use them as a distraction because, let's be real, Dretch are not exactly the most powerful of allies. But still, if a necromancer can figure out a way to put zombies to good use, I'm sure you can figure out how to put some Dretch to good use. But the curse makes this item far more interesting. There is a 10% chance that the summoning attracts the attention of a greater fiend, who may appear nearby 1d10 rounds later. Whatever fiend is summoned is not under the control of the bearer of the amulet and may attack or demand tribute. For the original item, this curse was a lot more specific. It named the fiend that may respond. It was a lot more detailed. I like my version because it leaves the narrator, the DM, so much room to build on the story in the campaign. You can have this amulet, when its curse is activated, summon a fiend that will show up and just attack the party and try to eat everybody's faces. But I think if you do that, you're missing a huge opportunity to develop the story further. Items like this give you the opportunity to add an NPC to your story that can function as many different things. It can be a quest giver, it can be a villain, it could be a source of information, it could end up being a rival. It could even be a tax collector if you decide to go with the demand tribute option. have a player who's interested in multi-classing into Warlock. It could even be a patron. Who knows? The possibilities are maybe not endless, but there are a lot of possibilities here. Just think of the plot twists that you can introduce with this. And last but not least, let's talk about one of my favorite types of items, sentient items. I'm going to pull up one that my players just found recently in a campaign that I'm running, and we'll talk about how it's going to play out. The great thing about sentient items is that they can feel like they're cursed to your players without them actually being cursed. The thing is, these things function like having an extra NPC in the party in a lot of ways. And an NPC that is, on the one hand, very useful to the party because of the power it brings, but on the other hand, may have goals and intentions that run counter to the party's morals, their own goals. In my campaign, this sword, a sentient vicious rapier, was found by an elven paladin in the party. As he was kind of playing around trying to get a feel for the item's abilities and everything, he attempted to prick his finger with it. It wouldn't let him. He felt the blade magically pull away. Then he tried harder a little later on and tried to stab his hand. The blade attempted to stop him. We ran a little mini contest of wills there, and he succeeded in stabbing his own hand. It was an interesting way of testing the capabilities of a sword. But in any case, the player's learning more about this weapon as he's testing it out. He goes on to attune with it and find out its base abilities. I reveal that it is sentient, but the personality will be revealed as the story progresses. What the players don't know at this point, spoiler alert for those who are playing in that campaign, is that this particular item has a special purpose, which is to protect elvenkind. Very specifically elvenkind, which is why it tried to prevent him from hurting himself when he was holding the blade. He's an elf. The blade's purpose is to protect elves, so it tries to prevent its wielder from hurting an elf. Protecting elvenkind sounds pretty nice. And on the surface, this looks like it'll be an item that lines up perfectly with the player's intentions. However, it can and will lead to some difficulties later on. For example, when he does run into an opponent who happens to be an elf, and the blade is trying to prevent him from attacking his opponent, what does he do at that point? When the blade feels that an elf is being threatened, and the blade wants its wielder to respond violently to protect that elf, when violence may not actually be warranted or justified in that situation, what does the player do? And part of the answer is not just what will he do, but can he overcome the will of this sentient blade and actually act of his own volition? Or will the blade take over and act for him, potentially putting him in a very difficult position story-wise? Is this a powerful item? Is it a useful item? Absolutely. It's a vicious rapier, so it does extra bonus damage on criticals. But can it be dangerous? That probably depends on the strength of that elven foe that he's trying to strike down, or the consequences of that situation in which the blade tries to take over for him and respond violently when he probably shouldn't. Are the risks greater than the rewards? And I don't know that there's a right answer. The players have to figure that out. And that's part of the fun in adding these cursed items to a campaign. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like what you heard, learned something new, or just enjoyed hanging out, I hope you'll click the subscribe button below. I'll be back soon to share more gaming tips and tricks to make your Dungeons & Dragons games better. See you soon.